Hello everyone and welcome to the Melbourne Traditionalists podcast 54. It's been about a month since episode 53 was put up, and I'm in Melbourne, Victoria, and we're in lockdown, and they announced it very quickly, so all of the equipment that I needed to do this podcast was stuck at the studio. So I ordered a microphone, and that came very quickly within 24 hours. But to put it onto YouTube, I have to match the audio with the image, and the program that I'd been using without any problem just wouldn't work on my computer. So I bought a new computer, and the program still didn't work. So we still haven't resolved that issue. So now I send the audio to a friend, and he joins them together, and then sends it back to me, and I upload it. So thank you very much for that. Now, today I wanted to talk about a letter that I've been sent. Mr. G, who's a friend of the Melbourne Traditionalists and has done some things for us over the years. He spoke to me about the issues that are all around us regarding immigration, and he said that he had something to contribute. So he wrote me a letter from an honest foreigner, and so he's not Australian, but he lives in Australia. He's planning to move back to his homeland, hopefully in the next handful of years. But I'll read the letter, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. Dear Mark, I'm writing to explain why I believe that Australians of specifically English descent are the only people who stand in the way of total global subjugation in this country. My reasoning proceeds from a distinction between the following Australians: those of English descent, those of other Irish, Scottish and Welsh descent, Australians of European descent, and non-whites. This distinction is key because history teaches us that ethnic division, even if seemingly harmless, weakens a nation, and at best leads to a breakup of the nation state, example Czechoslovakia, at worst to subjugation. It is common to contrast Czechoslovakia with Yugoslavia, but I do not think that Balkanization is the worst thing that can happen to a nation. Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia, even Bosnia are now ethnically homogenous nation-states, free to pursue their own destinies, whereas Australia's population resembles its founding stock less and less with every passing year. In listening to the Melbourne Traditionalist podcast episodes about the White Australia policy, it therefore jumped out at me that from the beginning, many of the people involved in the plan to destroy the specifically English and more broadly British character of Australia were themselves not purely of English stock. This is much easier to see after World War II, when individuals from alien, but still European, ethnicities played key roles in imposing multiculturalism on Australians. But looking further back, I believe you will find evidence of the same division between the English and the British ethnicities under the surface. Lest some readers think that this division amounts to nothing more than barracking against England in sport, note that the majority of victory in the Brexit referendum was much smaller because of Scotland and Northern Ireland. That is to say, were it up to the Scots, the whole of England would have been locked into the EU against its will. At this point you might ask, what do England and Scotland have to do with me? I'm Australian. But to the foreigner, you are not Australian. You are English. You are English because your ancestors came from England, and your being an Englishman is a logical impossibility. After all, says the foreigner, your family left England no more than a few generations ago. That's more, until recently, everyone else here was English too. A few years ago, while visiting Greece, it struck me that many of the people resembled locals in Oakley. By the same token, a visit from England to Australia 50 years ago would have seen familiar faces wherever he went. You have to understand that everything about you broadcast Englishness to us. English is actually your ethnic language, unlike ours. Your English Christian names are actually your authentic names, not anglicised like ours. Your surnames are English, unlike ours. And even if ours are anglicised, they refer to our original surnames. Your turn of phrases are English, unlike ours. Your traditional songs are English, unlike ours. And the way you think and speak and act are essentially English. You don't realise it, but anyone who is not Anglo can almost smell it on you. And of course, when you trace your ancestry, the records of your ancestors' births, deaths and marriages are in churches and archives in England. Now, the most important thing to understand is that the foreigner, having identified you as an Englishman, hates and envies you for it, because being raised to believe that he is superior to you, but in his heart he knows this to be a lie. He is raised on myths and legends, or fantasies, of his own people's greatness, but at every turn he is reminded that he lives in an Englishman's civilization. The Union Jack on the Australian flag, the names of states, cities, towns, streets, suburbs, statues of great Englishmen in public parks, which he would tear down in an instant if he could get away with it, the names of schools, all the prime ministers, the Queen on the money, and so on. What makes things worse is that the foreigner, especially the child or grandchild of an immigrant, hates the fact that some of your Englishness has rubbed off on him. You might think that the more he's like you, the more he will emphasise with you. But the opposite is true. The more he loses contact with his roots, the more inauthentic he will feel himself to be, and the more stridently he will assert his differences from you. I have lived here for 20 years and can tell you that there is nary an ethnic who does not think Anglo culture is boring and inferior. The foreigner says these silly things as a safe way to express a deeper, often incoherent resentment. The foreigner here does not speak his ancestral language and often speaks an ugly, inferior, inauthentic English vernacular, and the more Australianised, the more inauthentic and ignorant he feels himself to be when he visits the mother country, which is not England. Upon his return to Australia, he is both relieved and resentful, relieved to be in familiar surroundings, but ever the more resentful that it is not his world. However, there is a simple way to resolve this dilemma. It is to say that everyone can be an Australian, and to water down Australian identity from a blood and soil and ethnicity to an accent, some paperwork, and consumer brands. That way, everyone can be both Australian and whatever he really is. This is how the foreigner can resolve the cognitive dissonance of claiming to be both Australian and not Australian. The more Australia turns into a hodgepodge of ethnic mongrels, the more credible this attitude becomes. However, there is one group of people whose very existence threatens this charade. You. When you say, "I'm not an Englishman, my family has been here since the First Fleet," you attack the foundation of his worldview. For if you, who are an Englishman as far as he is concerned, claim to have somehow detached yourself from a 1500-year-long ethnic continuum, then you are saying that he cannot be an Australian without doing the same. Thus all foreigners, even European ones, have a common interest in the destruction of the Australian nation. If they can get rid of you, their children can wear your Australian identity as a skin suit, and there will be no one to contradict their views. To put it in a nutshell, if everyone is Australian, then no one is. And if no one is Australian, then everyone is. Regards, Mr. G. Well, there's quite a lot to unpack in that. It's quite an interesting letter. Now, first of all, I'd like to talk about whether we are English. And I don't think that we are. I think that we are a distinct nationality, and I think Canadians are a distinct nationality. I think Americans are a distinct nationality. I think New Zealanders are a distinct nationality. But like the Irish, the Scots, the Welsh, the English, we are a British peoples, and we are all connected. And that's why I like the idea of the Anglosphere, even though what I would like in my wildest dreams is not something that could ever actually be achieved. And I think that this idea of that we're just transplanted Englishmen is not a good one, because there are very, very few of us who are pure English, if you will, or even majority English. So I'm definitely British, but I don't think I could say that I'm exclusively English. I can definitely say I'm not, but I certainly have English blood, and I think that's much more common in Australians to actually have English as well as other British blood. But I also accept the part that Mr. G has said about us being indistinguishable from Englishmen and to foreigners. And I think that's absolutely true. I think that when you walk around and you talk to people, either in this country or overseas, they definitely see us as just another brand of English. Where there's no difference between Vegemite and Marmite, right? You might be able to tell the difference. I might be able to tell the difference, but the South Korean, it's just yucky yeast. And so they definitely do. I think that he is correct there that to the foreign eye we are definitely, or as he put it, they can smell it on us, and I think that's very true. And I think that that's also why the largest intelligence network in the world is the Five Eyes, and that's Australia, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. And it's called Five Eyes because it says on the documents, it'll have each country and then it will say eyes only. So for short, people just call it the Five Eyes. And they're all English-speaking countries. But of course, it's more than that. We're all British countries, right? An American is really a transported British man. The same for a Canadian and so forth. That's why it works. It's not just because we have common institutions. It's because we are basically the same people. That's why we trust each other. That's why we're prepared to put aside our mistrust to make it work. Now, when Mr. G was talking about the non-English makeup of Australia before World War II, and how that had greatly contributed to the destruction of white Australia, I think that's very true. And I primarily think that it is a problem with the Catholics within Australia, particularly the Irish Catholics, because sometimes this was true and sometimes it wasn't true, but there was always a group who were anti-English, anti-Church of England, and they always wanted to create a break, to create an entirely new identity that didn't have anything to do with the traditional idea of what an Australian was, right? An Englishman who lived in Australia. And eventually we actually all adopted that. And I said that just 10 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, whatever, that we are a new nationality. And that's what they were always working towards. But as part of that, they were also saying, well, we don't have to just have specifically English immigration or even expressly British. And their idea was that they would bring in different Catholic populations, so Spanish or Italian and so forth, and that they would have much more of a say in Australia's running, the Catholics and the Catholic Church. That didn't quite work out as many of those people expected. Things took a number of wild turns. But just as I find it a bit strange that all of this gets blamed on the Jews by many people, I also think it's too much to blame multiculturalism on Catholics or Catholicism, because there was a lot of English and a lot of Church of England people who were very much prepared to go along with this, who were very much prepared to support it and push it and make sure that it destroyed the country that they grew up in. And that's one of the big issues that hasn't been resolved by historical research, either on the right or in mainstream history study, is, why did people turn against their own kind? And there's far too much of this conspiracy theory, this conspiracy thinking, instead of actually... And there was conspiracy, because a conspiracy is a plan formed in secret with the intent of carrying out some kind of action. So, in a sense, I guess all policy, which, let's face it, people don't want to hear about, they want it to be done in secret, is a conspiracy. But that's different to a conspiracy theory, right? Which is the idea that a conspiracy took place. And, we really have to answer that question of, why did people turn against their own kind? Why did they think it was a good idea that their grandchildren would grow up in a country that they didn't recognise? And again, that's a question that we haven't answered to date. So now I'm going to read back some of the content of the letter and analyse it a bit more. Now, the most important thing to understand is that the foreigner, having identified you as an Englishman, hates and envies you for it, because he has been raised to believe that he is superior to you, but in his heart he knows this to be a lie. He is raised on myths and legends or fantasies of his own people's greatness, but at every turn he is reminded that he lives in an Englishman's civilization. Now, remember a time when I worked with a number of Indians, and what I found remarkable was how they were convinced that they were the greatest civilization the world's ever seen. And, they'd say, Hinduism's been around for thousands of years, and, we had the first civilization and in the Indus Valley and so on and so forth. And no understanding that, hey, between then and now, there's actually been a lot of downtime. And they were absolutely convinced. And this goes back to what the myths, legends, or fantasies of his own people's greatness. And of course, it's not just confined to Indians. You find it all over. The exact same problem I've encountered with Greeks and even Italians. We had this, the whole Western civilization's built on our civilization. And it's like, yeah, but between then and now, you've had a lot of downtime. You're not the greatness of Greece or Rome. Those days are over. You may have achieved other things since then, but, it's a long draw to go back to those civilizations. But they do. And again, you see this over and over. And here's another interesting point. At every turn, he is reminded that he lives in an Englishman's civilization. Now, there's another point that he makes that that comes back to this as well. I've lived here for 20 years and can tell you there is nary an ethnic who does not think Anglo culture is boring and inferior. And of course, sometimes you'll hear people on the left saying, oh, white people don't have a culture. And really what's happened is our culture has become world culture. So, you can go to practically any country on earth and you'll see our culture, which I guess for want of a better word we'll call English culture, English civilization. It's not strictly speaking true, but it does get across the idea that everyone wants to learn English. English is the international language. English is the way that people communicate, not just we communicate with each other, but people of two different language groups communicate with each other through English. So English is the world language. It's, our movies, our television, and I use our in the biggest sense of the English world, is the world standard. So if you were in Uruguay or you were in Uganda and you turned on the TV and there was, Friends showing, you probably wouldn't be shocked. You'd be like, well, yeah, of course it'd be on. That's how ubiquitous our civilization is. And that's what we have to understand, is that everyone in the world, whether they like it or not, and a lot of people don't like it, are living in our civilization. And that's a big burden to people. It's one of the burdens that Aboriginal people have, that that immigrants have, that blacks in America or in England, Muslims, all these people have the problem that they're living in somebody else's civilization. And they know that they don't really fit. It's not always a good match. And instead of thinking of it like a square peg in a round hole, maybe we should think of it like a slippery slide. You know, it at any particular point, it looks like you belong, but of course you're constantly slipping and sliding all over the place. You don't really fit anywhere. There's no place that's authentically yours. And we keep seeing this over and over. And this is another great point. I'm sorry, I'm trying to find where it is. Where the foreigner doesn't actually, he realises that, here it is, what makes things worse is that the foreigner, especially the child or grandchild of an immigrant, hates the fact that some of your Englishness has rubbed off on him. And we see this so much. You know, one of the things I've certainly noticed, and I know other people have noticed it because people have said it to me, you know, Chinese people. You meet an old Chinese person and they might not be that old, they might be middle-aged, and they're based. You know, they know about race, they know about ethnicity, they know about sex. You know, they understand it perfectly. But you talk to their children and their grandchildren, and they don't get it at all. And in fact, one of the things that really surprises, even shocks me, is how quickly immigrants' children, particularly Asian children, become SJWs. Just astonishingly quickly. And maybe it shouldn't, because, you know, in Asian cultures, and Asian cultures are like that because of their people, you know, it's a very conformist thing. So, you know, they're constantly being told by, at school and on TV and the radio and so forth, you know, about being woke, and they accept it. They just take it up. Of course, that's how they're supposed to be. They fit in. They're not great independent thinkers. But you see this all the time. You see this with all these ethnic groups. The person who comes here and they're normally grateful that they're here. And then after a while they begin to think, hey, you know, why can't I be treated better? You know? And often it's not us who are treating them this way, treating them bad. You know, a lot of the time I've noticed that it's their co-religionist or ethnic group who treats them the worst, who treats them like they would back in the old country. And then they're like, well, no, I'm here in Australia now. I want to be treated like an Australian. All right. And that fuels more immigration, because the people who are already here, they want people that they can look down on, right? Their own people. So they bring more, they agitate for more and more people to come in, which business and the government and now the churches are all very happy to accommodate. But that doesn't last. You know, the children and the grandchildren are very easily corrupted. And instead of picking up our best traits, they tend to pick up our worst traits. And sometimes they're not our traits, they're the traits of our civilization. So because there's black culture is held up to much higher esteem than it should be in the United States, that means it gets a much bigger voice than it has any right to have in the world, and that gets projected onto other people. I remember in the 1980s, I would meet Italians, like first generation born in Australia, and they acted like they were black Americans. I mean, it's ridiculous. They grew out of it, but you see that happening with other people, so Aborigines, a lot of Aboriginals will say, adopt the gangster rap attitude, and people are like, why? And they're like, oh, because they're black. All right. It's it has a lot more influence than we would really like to give it. And behind all this, we see and feel the hand of liberalism. Liberalism says that you can choose who you want to be. And these people are hearing that, and they're trying to live that out. And in real life, it doesn't really work. It's a real... You become Frankenstein's monster. Your hand is from one murderer, and your arms from another, and you're a monster because you're not natural. And that's what these people are. Not because they're bad people. Some of them are, most aren't. But they're totally unnatural, and they know that. That's what Mr. G is talking about there, how inauthentic they are, and how they adopt. They want to be. I saw this interview with all these ethnic types, and they were talking about how it was disgraceful that John Cleese had said that London didn't feel like an English city anymore, and this black woman said, I'm English, and I've got a better English accent than she does, and but she still wanted to be black as well as English, as well as Jamaican. That's very liberal of her, to take all these choices. I'm whatever I choose to be, and you can't tell me, you can't impose your values upon me. That's a very liberal thing to do. And of course, it's utterly ridiculous. Now, I think I should end there. I hope I haven't rambled on too much. But thank you, Mr. G. It was a very interesting letter, and I hope I get some comments on it, and some thoughtful comments at that. Thank you very much for listening. And if you want to support my work, you can by going to Subscribestar, which is in the description box below. And hopefully you'll hear me next week. Bye-bye.